Coming up on AEA Amplified, Thom Duncan, president of Thom Duncan Avionics.
From the Aircraft Electronics Association, this is AEA Amplified, a podcast for aviation's technology experts, with your host, Jeff Hill.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of AEA Amplified. I am Jeff Hill, the Director of Communications for the AEA and the editor of Avionics News Magazine, and we've got an exciting show lined up today. With me today is Mr. Thom Duncan, and he's the president of Thom Duncan Avionics, an AEA member company since 2018, and headquarters at the Fayetteville Municipal Airport in Fayetteville, Tennessee. Thom, thanks so much for joining us today, and how is everything in Tennessee?
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Everything is fantastic in Tennessee. The weather is absolutely beautiful today, sun's shining, 70, 75 degrees, and no rain in our forecast just yet. It's a beautiful day down here.
Beautiful day. And here it is in early October of 2020, and we are making some more history with this episode. It's the third episode we've done for AEA Amplified, which has been received really well within the AEA membership and within the general aviation community, but you happen to be the first repair station guest to be interviewed on our show. So thanks again for joining us. And I want to get into it. You've really got a cool story to share. You started your company just a couple of years ago. It's not even really been 2 years when you opened back in December of 2018. But you have a long personal history in the avionics industry and the AEA with owning Duncan Engineering and serving as the avionics manager at Carpenter Avionics for many years. In fact, I found this really cool. You actually applied for a scholarship with the AEA Educational Foundation 30 years ago, back in 1990. So this is something you've been wanting to do for quite a while. And then earlier this year, Avionics News Magazine actually published a member profile on your new company, and that was in the March 2020 edition of Avionics News, if you're interested in checking that out. And there's two really cool quotes in that article that jump out to me when I was reading that, and it was, "I wanted to do basically what I'm doing now. It only took me 29 years." And then the second one is, "I'm not a marketing and sales guy. I don't sugarcoat stuff. I'm just a technician who fixes things right." And then that is awesome. So tell us a little about your personal aviation story and where, when, and how did you get the aviation bug?
Oh, thank you for the great introduction. I had the aviation bug since as early as I can remember. There was a neighborhood gentleman named Mr. Stamp, we called him Mr., had a old airplane in his, it was a fabric airplane of some kind. I don't know the whole story, but that's where it started. He was doing engineering stuff for Rock Island Arsenal in the city that I grew up in, the Quad Cities in Illinois. And we were always fixing stuff and doing things, and I just got some really good training on how to fix things and do things right early on from 10, 12 years old, and learned how to do that stuff, and was always interested in airplanes and writing articles and papers for school with Warbirds, the terrible, the twin airplanes, the terrible two military ones from World War II and things like that over the years, and wrote just a bunch of stuff for high school, and then finally got the bug. There was a school in Davenport, Iowa, Hamilton Aerotech, that started an avionics division, and I was in the second class for the avionics division. Started in registered in 89, sorry, and the first class was in 89. The second class started in 1990, and that's when I did the AEA scholarship submission to see if I could get a scholarship. At that point, I had already decided that I wanted to start a shop. I just took a while to actually do it.
Yeah, and so now that you're up and running, tell us a little bit about the type of work you specialize in. Is it autopilots, or what type of work does Thom Duncan Avionics do for your customers?
Well, a little bit of everything in the GA sector. We're in smaller aircrafts, Cessna 172s, 182s, 210s, 206s, Barons and small Pipers, some light twins, some light turboprops, and doing Garmin and Aspen installs. We are doing repairs on autopilots. I'm relatively infamous or famous for doing autopilot repairs, and we have tried to expand our autopilot repair capabilities. So we're doing lots of that. There's not a whole lot of folks that are repairing autopilots right now, or can diagnose and troubleshoot them effectively. So that's kind of one of our mainstays, and then the rest of it is just installs with navigators and the new glass displays and audio panels and still trickling transponders in there for ADSB.
And so with autopilots being such a key niche for your business, I noticed that, as part of your company, you also have a division of Thom Duncan Avionics, and that's called Autopilot South. What is Autopilot South, and how is that connected to Thom Duncan Avionics?
Well, we are in the South, in southern Tennessee, just north of Huntsville, Alabama. So South was a moniker that seemed logical, and autopilots is what I'm known for again. And I always wanted to have an autopilot South, to focus on autopilots. When the thought was born, it was going to be repair of autopilots, because there was not new autopilots that were coming out. We had done panels, we had done navigators, we had done transponders, we did everything in the panel, but the autopilots were still the same legacy autopilots. So I was going to develop a business that focused on repairing autopilots. And as time has gone on, especially in the last 3 years, the certifications of STCs and AML lists of autopilots, new autopilots from Garmin and Aztec and the Benix King True Track line, the new autopilots, it's starting to not make sense to start to continue to repair 40-year-old autopilots, 50-year-old autopilots. It's no longer as logical as it was even 5 years ago.
And when you were thinking about starting your repair station, and that's probably been a while ago, but I believe if I'm correct, that you attended the AEA Certified Repair Station training course at the AEA headquarters. Is that correct?
I did. Me and another gentleman from a previous company I worked at went there and did the training over several days, and there were a lot of takeaways from that. It was a very deep. In fact, there are still things that Rick taught in that class, or we went over in that class, that I still use today and used as a part of developing the repair station manual and repair station processes that we have in play now. And a lot of that came from some of that structure came from that class.
Yeah, and that class is actually right now in the current format is a 5-day course, all day, with Mr. Rick Perry teaching that course. He's the AEA's Vice President of Government and Industry Affairs and does a great job with that course. But there's so much content that's covered in that class. Was it important, do you think, to get that personal face-to-face instruction in an intimate setting in that training room? And I say intimate just because we limit the class size of that course to somewhere between 15 to 20. Pre-COVID, it might have been 25 people in that class. But how important is that in-person instruction to really taking an impact for you that you could take back and go start your own business?
Well, the majority of a repair station manual, by the way, it is requested to be written as a part of 145, is essentially going to be the same, and the wording should be pretty similar amongst any repair station manual you read, because we're all conformed to the same kind of structure. And to ask specific questions about elements of the repair station manual was ideal to get clarity, to get expansion of wording inside of the repair station manual, to clarify things and to maintain compliance. And there were a lot of cases that less was more, and learned those things. And then sometimes there was things that needed to be more detailed, and there were very robust takeaways from that class for those topics.
Yeah, and anyone who's interested in that class, of course, can check it out for the next date and times on those at aea.net/training. And once again, we're visiting with Thom Duncan, the president of Thom Duncan Avionics, here on AEA Amplified. This podcast is brought to you by Avionics News, the monthly magazine of the AEA that's available in print, online, and via mobile apps for Android and iOS devices. For a free subscription or to read Avionics News digitally, visit avionicsnews.net, or you can get it on Google Play or download it on the App Store. Thom, we entered 2020 and it's been an interesting year. We'll get into that in just a second. But when we came up on the year, it was January 1st, 2020, and it was the deadline for ADS-B, the FAA's deadline here in the United States, for all aircraft in controlled airspace to be equipped with ADS-B out avionics. So if you could just describe the run up to the ADS-B deadline, what that meant to your business. Are you still seeing folks, even though we're now 10 months, 9 or 10 months past the deadline, are you still doing ADS-B installs or has that died down a little bit?
We are still doing ADS-B installs. They are not as popular of a topic. Most of the topics for installs was focused on just the ADS-B. We have had a multitude of customers. There's really two scenarios. One, they have regrets of not going with a more advanced model of ADS-B to get all the features, and they're coming back to upgrade what they already had in there. So we're seeing a lot of that change. And we're also seeing ADS-B requests because there are, and maybe just because I'm looking, there's a whole lot of aircraft for sale in the region. And what's happened is these aircraft haven't been flying very much, and they've been in the hangar and somewhat taken care of, but they have not had panel updates in 10, 15, 20 years. And they're popping back onto the market with folks that want to fly them and want them upgraded, unfortunately, right now. And they are getting ADS-B navigators, glass displays, autopilots, panels requests. There's across the board for those kind of airplanes. That is the majority of what we're seeing right now, is aircraft that have not been heavily in service that are getting upgraded with ADS-B, or need to be upgraded with ADS-B because now somebody wants to fly them and fly the wings off of them because they found a gem sitting in a hangar.
Right. So you probably entered the year with a backlog of ADS-B requests coming into the season. But so here we are. Now it's October of 2020. And surprise, surprise, in mid-March, we all got thrown a curveball with the pandemic, COVID-19. So I want to talk about that a little bit. You know, the AEA has an avionics market report that is put out quarterly, and it reports worldwide avionics sales from the manufacturers. And through the first 6 months of 2020, sales were down 23.6% compared to the first half of 2019. And it's not surprising given the economic conditions that the country faced there in the late March, April, May, and even into June and beyond that. In fact, during the second quarter months of April, May, and June, sales decreased by an amount of 37%. So what I'm interested, though, is a lot of the shops that we talk to in the AEA headquarters indicate that our shops are still busy. So I'm curious to know is, how has COVID-19 impacted your business? What operational or staffing adjustments did you have to make, if any? And kind of, how did your customers respond to the pandemic?
Well, the pandemic really didn't slow us down, other than it sort of gave us a break because there weren't as many visitors that were coming in. Everybody kind of stayed away for the first 2 months. So that was kind of, we'll call it nice to not have as many visitors stop by, and it got us an opportunity to catch up on some of the backlog work that we had that was already in the hangar and already in the channel for work. The COVID stuff, it almost increased our business level, believe it or not. We had to very quickly find someone else to hire for a technician because we were overrun with a level of work that we weren't able to produce without another couple of people to help. And in fact, we had two going into the end of the year. And at the start of the year, we hired an apprentice technician, and he's getting traction 10 months later, actually my son. And towards April, May, it became very apparent that the level of work that we had, we needed another person, and we found another person in the region that needed a job and hired him. So we ended up with 4 technicians, and that's about where we've stayed because there's not there's not a whole lot of talent in the region to hire. I think COVID has stopped a lot of people from moving around with job movement, but it didn't really affect us very much. In fact, I think our sales increased about 10% because of COVID.
So it sounds like some people who are kind of getting tired, or were always tired of being cooped up in their house from an aircraft owner perspective and a pilot, they're still out wanting to fly, and it almost becomes a release for them. So in some ways, as you said, it may have had a side effect that was positive for our industry.
Well, I think something that did happen is when COVID hit, everybody got to stay home. So I think there were a couple of guys that sat on their computer and started shopping for aircraft parts is what I really think happened. And they had a lot of spare time to think about stuff. So that was a pretty good amount of phone calls and sales prospects and customers and friends that reached out over the last 6-8 months that needed advice for those things, and that hasn't slowed down too much. In the last couple of weeks, it's slowed down some, but it's still pretty steady.
Right, and I know some of the guidelines vary in the country depending upon your geographic location about local orders on wearing a mask and social distancing and limits to the number of people who can gather. But your business, which I believe has 6 employees, if I'm correct, what's it like? Is it easy, or is it more difficult for a repair station with just the type of work we do to socially distance themselves? I mean, you're in a hangar. How difficult or challenging has that been, if at all, for your 6 employees to adhere to those social distancing guidelines?
Well, the majority of us come to work and go home, and that's kind of what we figured out during the COVID thing, is we don't do a whole lot of extra stuff. So we're haven't been really exposed. Most of us in the shop, but 1 or 2 of us are work home, driving back and forth. So we haven't been exposed. We're also in a lower populated region, so there's not as many people around. And again, single engine airplanes don't have a lot of room for 2 people in them. So we sort of social distance automatically, because you can't fit 2 people in a cockpit of a 172. It's not very comfortable to work that way. We explored a mask policy. Our county didn't mandate a mask policy. When you go 4 miles south Alabama, we're right next to the border, they still have a mask policy. A lot of stores in the area. The biggest thing is we lost restaurants weren't open in the region where we were at for especially the first 2 to 3 months of the pandemic. Things have gone somewhat back to normal now, but social distancing really wasn't a thing. We limited access to the hangar for other than primary crew. Just not a bad thing. And sometimes you don't want customers run around the hangar. I mean, everybody throws it's insurance reasons. I've never actually heard the insurance company say that, but it's kind of nice that they're not underfoot when you're working on stuff in the hangar and asking questions, because it does slow the guys down. So that was actually helpful, that they couldn't just be anywhere they wanted to be. But other than that, it was just normal operations.
Right. Has it changed any of the way you check out a customer after you do the install? I know a lot of times when you do the work, you want to be able to show the customer how to operate. Did that change anything in how you interact with the customers?
There were a couple of early ons. I did have a couple of customers that were doctors, medical, nurse practitioners that were connected to COVID environments, that we opted to not do a side-by-side delivery of any length on a flight. So there were a few redactions. We very much pride ourselves in flying the aircraft out with the customer at the end, because it's our work. If one of our standards is, if you don't feel like you could put your family in the airplane and go fly your family in the airplane, what more could you do that you would feel that way and feel comfortable? And that's the way we try to do work. And we weren't able to do that effectively for the first couple of months, but we're pretty much back to normal now. Nothing's we don't have any restrictions. There was a period of time that we started this essential, non-essential business stuff. I don't remember if it came from you or one of the consortiums for our drug program, We ended up with letters of essential workers so we could travel. We had our travel papers. We could go where we wanted to, back and forth to work. And if we got stopped, we had a paper that said we were essential. And we were our essential workers. We're keeping aircraft flying for doctors and lawyers and critical infrastructure people, and considered ourselves very important in the process of making sure those people could continue to fly their airplanes, especially for service work. Install work, not so much, because that's a time delay, but keeping our customers flying that are important for critical infrastructure was important to us.
Absolutely. And, we're, again, October of 2020, hopefully we'll have a vaccine coming along the way soon. I keep hearing about that possibly by the end of the year. But if you were to, get your crystal ball out, like some of us like to do, and looking into that for 2021 and the some people like to say the new normal, how do you expect 2021 to be different than 2020? I know it sounds like you're still busy. Your customer backlog goes well into 2021, but what do you foresee going into next year?
Well, autopilots are getting certified faster and faster, and the AML list is getting bigger and bigger. So autopilots is going to be a core of what we do. We intend to ride that wave of autopilot installs and autopilot excellence for repairs well into the next 3 to 5 years, especially into 2021. The COVID and all of the stuff in 2020 has sort of changed the trajectory. Anybody that's in business, all the key indicators that we used to have sort of flipped upside down, and it's hard to predict exactly where things are going to go. So we're just riding the wave that we're on for the moment. We are adding our capabilities to the shop and to the repair station to do more and more stuff, and it gets better every week. And, the future is really just more of the same of what we're doing, and seeing if we can find some more space and some more technicians to scale.
Yeah, and that's great. So it sounds like you would hire more if you can find them.
Yes.
That's kind of been a challenge for our industry. Anybody who's followed it knows that there is a workforce development challenge within general aviation at large. But what experience or character traits do you look for when you're hiring a technician? And maybe what advice would you give to aspiring technicians who want to enter the industry?
Well, technicians that are really self-starters is probably one of the most important things, and honesty and integrity are going to be two other elements that a technician and anybody in the aviation industry really needs. We are self-monitored, and there's not a whole lot of oversight. I mean, there is in a repair station, but there's not a whole lot of oversight. We're sort of on an honor system, so a technician needs to have a very high integrity, and to recognize when they don't know how to do something, to ask questions. That's probably one of the highest traits, and knowledge can be learned, but there's a few traits that just are inherent. I have spent 30 years trying to decide exactly what they are. I had a conversation with my mentor many years ago that I could train someone to do what I could do, and he pretty much told me no, I couldn't, and it took me a while to learn that is true. If they don't have a certain set of skills to build off of, you can't train someone to think logically if they're not able to do so. Knowledge of systems is pretty important, but just those skill sets of being able to diagnose and understand something, no matter what it is, with limited information, is probably the most desired trait to find in a technician. I have made a statement. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so it sounds like somebody is interested in electronics and has those character traits, that work ethic that you described. It sounds like you're willing to onboard them and train them and teach them the avionics piece of it.
At the moment in our growth trajectory, it would be nice to have someone that could sort of, as we say, hit the ground running, that could go straight in and start doing stuff, knowledge of wires and crimps and pins and tie-ups. I mean, system interfaces with 429s, RS-232s and programmings, it changes so fast, we have to learn it just about every day. So having that skill 5 years ago is different than today, because the systems that have advanced substantially, especially from the Garmin product line. We have talked about the apprenticeship side of it, and at the moment we can do one at a time. And when the apprentice gets to the point where he can train somebody, then it's time for the next one to come on board. The scaling of technicians has been something that has been a challenge that I've watched for the last 30 years, and it certainly has not changed. I have made a somewhat funny statement as all the smart people got out of aviation in 2008 and 2011. And some of us are just still here, just don't know what to do with ourselves. We just love it so much.
Well, Thom, how can aircraft owners in the Midwest and the Tennessee region find you? What's the best way for them to contact you? And also tell us, what part of the state of Tennessee is Fayetteville?
Fayetteville is about 70 miles south of Nashville, 20 miles north of Huntsville, right between 24 and 65. We're a 10-minute flight or 3-minute flight from Huntsville Executive Airport in North Huntsville. The easiest way to find us is our webpage, Thom Duncan Avionics, THOMDUNCAN, avionics.com. The Autopilot South is a little bit easier to remember without the H in there. AutopilotSouth.com. The two sites are blended together. Autopilot South has lots of autopilot information on it, and they both are tied together with all of our contact information on it.
Well, Thom, thanks so much for joining us here on AEA Amplified. That's been sponsored by Avionics News Magazine, and we look forward to seeing you and your team soon at an upcoming AEA or industry event. We've got another Connect conference here to go this fall in Kansas City, and are planning our AEA Annual International Convention and Trade Show in Dallas next March. So hopefully we'll get a chance to see you there. But before we close, is there anything we missed or any other items that you'd like to share with our listeners in the aviation community?
Thank you all for having me. I'm honored to have been selected to do this podcast. I'm a very proud member of the AEA, Aircraft Electronics Association, from the beginning. That was really one of the first things that I wanted to make sure that I did as we started the shop and started to laying the foundation. Your organization is pivotal in our success with the training and everything that you guys do for the industry. We're just proud to be a part of all of it.
Thanks again, and we look forward to visiting with you soon. And again, to learn more about Thom Duncan Avionics, you can visit thomduncanavionics.com. And again, as he mentioned, there is an H in there, so it's THOM duncanavionics.com. That's thomduncanavionics.com with the H. And that's going to wrap it up for today. And we hope you can join us again soon for another episode of AEA Amplified. And don't forget, you can learn more about the AEA online at aea.net, or follow us on social media platforms at LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Until next time here on AEA Amplified, so long everybody, and be safe.